So we're approaching a day that's really special to me, March 9th, which is the second year anniversary of the day that my life changed forever. March 9th, 2018 was the day that I told the story that I'm about to tell you for the first time ever to people. This week, February 24th to the 28th, is NEDA Week. It's a week put on by the National Eating Disorders Association of America to raise awareness and education about eating disorders. My name is Julia. About 5 years ago, almost 6 actually, I almost died from an eating disorder. It's been 5 years since my intervention, since I entered physical health restoration and active recovery, about 3 years since I finished that process, and a little bit less than 2 years ago, I stood on a stage at my high school at our TEDx conference, and I delivered a TED Talk and told everybody for the first time ever what I went through.
I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do this. I can't.
That night on stage, I also published my book, Undisordered, about my eating disorder story. And the reason why I'm saying that I told everyone for the first time that night was because I, for the entirety of my recovery process, kept it a secret from everyone in my life. The only people who really knew what I was going through were my doctors and my immediate family. I'm sure people could tell by my external appearance that I wasn't well, but I really wanted to make sure that nobody knew what I was going through because I was ashamed. I looked down on myself and I thought that my eating disorder was a personal failure, was a sign of my weakness. I treated my mental illness as my personal failure, and that is one of the biggest regrets of my life. Before I go into things, sorry, this video might be a little bit disorganized because I'm just trying to sit down and speak about this, and I have so many thoughts going through my head right now that I don't really know how to organize things. So I guess I'll just start from the beginning of my story. My eating disorder was primarily anorexia. I did suffer from bulimia for about a 6-month period, but my main problem was restriction. It's really hard for me to pinpoint where exactly it started, and it was really at its active worst for about a 1-year period between my 7th, 8th grade and freshman year of high school. But I think it was going on for a long time before that, and I can pinpoint some of the earliest signs of that mentality. In about 5th grade, I think I lived with a dormant eating disorder for a long time in my life, just picking up on those habits and not necessarily paying attention to them until they started to become my entire life and threaten my entire life. I was a late bloomer, so I hit puberty in about 7th grade of middle school. Puberty means gaining weight, and healthy weight at that. It's a completely natural thing. I think subconsciously I knew this isn't the right way to go. It started off as just something that gave me a feeling of control. The tricky thing is, though, it gives you that feeling of control, but in reality you don't have any control over it. That was one of the things that bothered me most throughout recovery, was people telling me, just snap out of it. You're in control of yourself. Just get a grip. Anybody who has suffered from any kind of mental illness can tell you it's not like that. You don't have control. So to all the people who gave me that advice, I know a lot of them meant well, but it hurt me more than anything else. I got really unhealthy very quickly, and it was something that you could visibly see on the outside. I remember really distinctly a day that my history teacher in 8th grade pulled me aside after class and asked me if there was something going on at home, because I looked like I was dying. And I didn't understand why I was being singled out. I thought she was attacking me because I didn't see it in myself. But years later, when I looked at pictures of myself during that period of my life, it's so strange how warped the image in the mirror was. But I looked like I was dying because I was. So even though I'd been living with these kind of dormant, disordered habits for a large part of my life, it really ramped up and got bad very quickly. And over a period of 6 months, I lost about a quarter of my body weight. On April 29th, 2015, I had an intervention. My mom, who I love with all my heart, and who I credit with saving my life, intervened in my disorder's path of self-destruction. And the next couple months of my life after that were hell, because I didn't want to live. Because my family had intervened, I was no longer really able to carry on those habits that were giving me comfort, and I was brought into the hospital. And even then, I don't think I even realized how serious everything was. I was in a haze, I was in a fog, and a lot of this period of my life, those couple months where I was on the brink of death every day, I don't remember most of it because my body wasn't focusing on my brain and preserving those memories. It was focusing on keeping my organs alive. I was almost at a level of instability where they could have checked me into an inpatient facility, but we decided to proceed with outpatient treatment. And from the date of my intervention in late April to about July, I was being told to recover but I just didn't know how. That stretch of just a few months was the worst period of my life, and probably always will be. I was young when I was going through it, but I know in my heart that that is probably the hardest thing I'll ever go through. And even though it was the worst period of my life, I'm really comforted to know that I had those resources, healthcare access, and having doctors who cared enough to help me survive. Sorry, I don't want to cry on camera because I really get uncomfortable when other people cry in their videos. On a summer day in July, I made my first and only ever suicide attempt. I don't want to talk about this too much. Most I've ever talked about it was in my book, and it's still something that I have such a hard time thinking about, because those memories of trying to swallow a bunch of pills and then realizing at this last second, I want to live. That day changed me forever. Because of all those months of misery, my memory of it all is kind of hazy and fuzzy because I think I blocked out a lot of it. But that day and that moment I remember as clear as if it happened yesterday. That was the day that I started recovery. Not April 29th, not the first day that I was diagnosed, not the day that I first went to the doctor. It was the day that I realized that I wanted to live. And I had to recover for myself. Not for the people around me. That was another thing I was told so often was, you have to live because the people around you will be hurt if you die. I didn't want to recover for the people around me. I wanted to recover for myself. My life is my own, and I wanted to recover not because I love the people around me, but because I love myself. So yeah, recovery started, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done, honestly. But I was finally doing it for the right reasons. It took me about 3 years to fully regain my physical health. To regain my mental health, I honestly don't know if I'll ever be healed fully. I don't really think it's possible. I think I'm always going to carry a part of that with me, but to a certain degree I'm really thankful for that. And I wouldn't change what I went through for anything because it's made me who I am today. But for the sake of formality, my recovery ended in the beginning of my junior year of high school. This entire time, it had been the darkest secret I'd ever kept. I had a best friend at the time who I'd been best friends with for 14 years. I didn't tell her what was going on. I didn't tell any of my other friends because I was ashamed. I thought it was something to be embarrassed about. I thought it was a sign that I was weak, that I couldn't protect myself from developing a mental illness, that I was lesser because of what I went through. So the entire time of my recovery, I was alone. Really, really alone. And my solace was writing. I wrote everything. I just kept this long Google Doc of my thoughts and what I was going through and how I was feeling. And the first person I ever told my story to was my junior year English teacher. One of our first assignments was just something he wanted to do to get to know us. It was like the first week of school or something. And it was just a short essay, write about the hardest thing that you've ever gone through. I could have written about calculus because goddamn, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But somehow I wrote about my disorder and I wrote about what I went through and how I just finished recovery, but I was still feeling kind of broken inside. My English teacher is one of the greatest mentors I've ever had in my life, one of the greatest friends I've ever had, and he was the first person to tell me that my story was not a thing to keep a secret. He helped me realize that in my struggle there was a certain power and a certain beauty to what I'd gone through, and he helped me take that step of turning this diary that I'd been keeping and writing in for about 3 years into a story, into words on paper, into a book. I like to think that I started writing my book when I started writing those diaries, but I think it became a book and a story when someone had enough faith in me to tell me that they believed in me and that I should believe in my own story. By February 2018, I had 116 pages, 11 chapters, and I was given the amazing opportunity, for which I am forever going to be thankful for, to give a TED Talk at my school. I told them I was going to talk about mental health. They didn't know that I was going to publish a book that night or tell the story of my struggle with mental illness. But in mid-February, after a couple rounds of editing, I sent off my final draft to the publisher. And on March 9th, I stood on stage in front of all my friends, a bunch of strangers, a lot of parents actually. It was kind of weird. Teachers, my principal, everybody that I'd thought would look at me as a lesser person if this story ever got out. That was the day that my life changed forever. And that was the day that I set myself and my story free. It was quite possibly the biggest leap of blind faith that I've ever had in myself, because I didn't want this story to become me. I didn't want to be known in my school as ED girl. But I did want people to know who I am, what I've gone through, and what I've survived to get to where I am today. That night, with my sister in the crowd filming me like the mom in Mean Girls, I did that. I'm sharing this today because A, I missed NEDA week last year because I wasn't planning well, and B, I'm at a place with the story. It's no longer inordinately painful. It's still painful, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I survived. I turned my story into something bigger than myself, and I want to share it with people. And most of all, I want anybody who's going through their own battle, or anyone who loves someone who's going through their own battle, to know that it's possible to make it through. I thought recovery would take everything out of me, but it built me back up stronger than I've ever been before, and I wouldn't give up that experience for anything. And in a way, I think I'll always be recovering and learning new things about myself. It still colors the way that I look at and interact with the world. It still makes my heart skip a beat when I'm at work in the ER and a patient comes in with an eating disorder or a suicide attempt or both. When that happens, the feeling of my heart just dropping into my stomach, the world just seeming to stop for a second, tells me that no, I'm not fully recovered still, and I'll always probably feel that way. But I'm able to move past it now. So this year, I'm making this video and sharing my story today because this week for NEDA week, I wanted to do something, and I wanted to raise money for this charity that I think has, on multiple occasions, saved my life. When I was in some of my darkest moments, I was able to get online and do like an online chat, live chat with NEDA's therapists and get help immediately and have those resources at my fingertips. They're saving lives and working to destigmatize the thing that I was once so ashamed of, and I think that's everything. All I really knew was that I wanted to raise money for NEDA. I wasn't really sure how exactly I wanted to do it, because I don't think it's like in good taste to make merch for it or anything, but it hit me about a month ago. When I first published my book, I had the first ever batch of books printed and sent to my house. It was a batch of 100 of the first edition of Undisordered, and of that batch of the first edition, I have 25 copies left. My book is on Amazon, and that's like the main way it's sold, but I still have about 25 copies of that original batch just because I wanted to like hold on to them as something special, because these are the only ones that have like the glossy front cover and that are from the first batch that is really special to me. So I'm going to be selling the last 25 copies of the first edition. They'll be sold, I'm 99% sure right now, in my Poshmark closet, and for these 25 books I'll be including a personalized note in all of them. I will be donating every penny of the profits to the National Eating Disorder Association. This year especially, NEDA needs extra funding. I want nothing more than to be a part of that. So otherwise my book is on Amazon, and I want to take all the profits from the month of February and also donate it to NEDA on top of that. So, but yeah, I wanted to do a fundraiser for a charity that has saved my life, and I believe will save so many others. I shared a little bit of the story last year, but I didn't go into depth because it was still something a little bit too painful for me. You guys know me, I'm very guarded and I'm very private about most of my life, and I'm very cautious of oversharing things that I feel like could be painful for me to share. Despite that though, I've never been so sure of anything in my life, knowing that sharing this story was the right decision, and I'm so glad that about 2 years ago, on March 9th, I did that for the first time ever. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for listening to my story, whether it's something that you've gone through or something that you're just wishing to learn about. I think the more awareness we can bring, the less stigmatized it'll be, and maybe someday people like me won't be so scared of their own stories. Before I sign off and end the video, I do want to say I hope that my story has helped you, especially if you are going through something very similar. However, one thing I will ask and request is that you refrain from DMing me personal details and asking me to act as a therapist. Of the little bits and pieces I've shared of this story in the past, I've had DMs being sent to me telling me really intimate, very raw emotional details and asking me for life-saving advice, which I'm not qualified to give. Please do not treat people on social media and online influencers as therapists. It is unfair to them to put that kind of burden of your life and caring for you, and most importantly, it's ineffective. Please, if you can, see a professional therapist. If my story has helped you in any way, shape, or form, that is all I need to die happy. But I do need people to know that it is personally very triggering for me to have to read people's own stories and DMs, because it does bring me back to a place that I have left behind. So I think that's all I have to say. I've been talking for about 2 hours, and I don't know how this video is going to turn out. But even if I don't end up uploading this, I feel so good right now. So thank you for listening to my story. My name is Julia. I'm a student, a teenager, a Californian, a future doctor, a makeup artist, pogo stick enthusiast, an author, a poet, a survivor. I survived.